Hey everybody, welcome back to BA Recovery. So today I wanted to answer a question that got left in the comment section of my last video. If you didn't see my last video, I'll put a link in the description below so you can go listen to it. But it was basically talking about the ways that a narcissist will deflect a conversation and sort of keep the victims in a state of confusion in order to remain, in their view, superior or on top, right? This top-down communication that they always seem to need. And two of the ways they do that is by a straw man fallacy. Sorry if you can hear banging. My neighbors up top are, I don't know, it sounds like they're bowling. It's really frustrating. But anyways, I don't know if you can hear that or not. So they'll build a straw man, which means that you'll make a point. You're trying to have a conversation. And you make a point about something that happened, something they did, something they said, anything in the world. And instead of coming back and either arguing or debating that point or having an opinion on what you said, they'll twist what you said by either blowing it out of proportion, adding to it, subtracting from it, taking it out of context, or they'll completely make something up. But then they'll argue that. So they're arguing something you never said. And then, of course, there's no way to have a rational conversation that way. And so the other one is the ad hominem fallacy, where they'll discredit what you just said or the point you just made by attacking you personally. And then, of course, as we all know, that puts you on the defense, and then the conversation goes to you trying to defend your character, and guess what conveniently never gets talked about? Them, or whatever they did. So those are just two ways. They probably have many more ways, but... So the question about that was so good, I just wanted to talk about it. So the question is, do you think that they, meaning narcissists, are aware of this misunderstanding and deliberately doing it, or whether they really are misunderstanding us because of the way their sick brains are wired? From what you have said, it sounds like they are aware, and it's so hard to imagine how someone could be so calculative and go to such lengths to keep us confused. They seem to also sit on both ends of the intelligence spectrum. They're so dumb in how they manage their lives, yet very clever when it comes to psychological manipulations. Yeah. So I thought this was such a good question, and it was such a hard thing to wrap my mind around and figure out. It probably took me years to sort of really understand this. And so I just wanted to talk about it. And of course, whatever feedback you guys have, if you have examples or perspectives, like, feel free to start a conversation on this. But it was so good, I just wanted to comment on it. So the first question was, do you think they're aware of this misunderstanding and deliberately doing it, or whether they're misunderstanding us because of the way their sick brains are wired? I think, and this is just my perspective on that, is that it's both. That if their brains were wired the way that ours is, and this isn't truly, and I think we have to always remember that this isn't a brain problem. This is a heart problem. Narcissism is an emotional problem, and it affects the way that they think, but it isn't primarily something wrong with their brains. So when you don't have a conscience, when you don't have empathy for other people, when the only thing you care about is yourself, and there's no boundaries or limits to that you have, because you don't have a conscience or remorse, you have no problem destroying other people. It's absolutely not an issue. So your mind is going to be thinking of ways to bolster yourself, and there's no limits on that. But the problem isn't the mind, the problem is the heart. So I think that is important, and the heart meaning emotions, that lack of empathy, the lack of remorse, the lack of any love whatsoever, no ability to emotionally bond with other people or things. There's no compassion. So that is the primary problem. And of course, without any of those things, that is going to impact the way that you think. So keep that in mind. But so the problem is that they're sick. Let's just say that. they have a cancer. And then, yes, they are aware. And yes, they're deliberately doing it because they don't care. So it's both and not either or in my mind. It's almost like asking if, like, a professional bank robber, are they robbing banks on purpose, or is there something wrong with them? Well, they wouldn't be robbing banks perpetually if there wasn't anything wrong with them. Like, if they had a conscience and if they had a good set of morals, and if they felt like, if they had a sense of fairness and they didn't want to treat people unfairly and they wanted to work for what they got, like most honest people are. Clearly there's a problem going on that is affecting their decisions, and because of that, they are now deliberately doing things that aren't right, that hurt other people. So I see it as kind of a both and, not an either or. That because we have to always keep in mind what is their goal. We always have to keep in mind what their goal is. And their goal, a narcissist's goal, is to get supply. It's to constantly be feeding their sense of superiority, their grandiose view of themselves that is so far out of touch with reality that they'll manipulate reality to fit their delusion rather than process reality and adjust their delusion to fit reality. So that's how they operate. That's how they go about in the world. That's how they approach every conversation. So if you make a point, and that point is not bolstering their sense of superiority, their grandiose self-view, their image that they're obsessed with themselves. And in your mind, like, this is not how normal people think, right? Because we don't care that much, right? We want to connect. Our goal is connection. Our goal is relationship. Our goal is understanding. So whether we're explaining ourselves or asking questions so that we can understand, we're not thinking about, is this making me look like a perfect, amazing God or not? Like, that's just not, it's not our goal. But it is their goal. So if you ask a question of them, the way that their minds, because that's all they value, that's all they care about, that's all they pursue, that's all their entire motivation in life is to get that supply constantly. They constantly need it. So down into a conversation, if you address something that they did that would indicate that they're not absolutely in every way 100% perfect, even if it's the most innocent question in the world, like, hey, I thought yesterday you said this, but now you did this. Can you help me understand? Can you clarify? On your end, you're not accusing them of anything. You're asking for understanding, even giving them the benefit of the doubt, assuming that there's an explanation, assuming that there's a rational explanation. But the way that they're going to interpret that is, how dare you question my superiority? They're going to take that question as a narcissistic injury, because built into that question is the assumption that they even need to explain themselves. Well, perfect people never have to explain themselves. So they're actually going to be offended by the question. So maybe in that instance, they do an ad hominem and they just attack your character. And they say, how dare you? Are you angry? Are you unforgiving? Whatever. Like, they'll make whatever up that works. And then, of course, you're very confused. Like, what in the world? I didn't say anything about that. I literally just asked you a question. Can you please answer it? But so all these misunderstandings, all these complete irrational confusions, well, we have to stop trying to make sense out of nonsense. Because if you're just trying to pick apart their answer and trying to make some kind of sense out of it, then you're going to end up in crazy town. Like, you're going to end up feeling like you have lost your mind because you're entering into an alternate universe. They do not think that way. They only think about what is going to make them look good. They only think about what is going to make them feel superior. So if you make a point, or even if you're discussing the most minute, like, non-personal thing ever. Say you're just talking about the weather, but they make a point that doesn't really make sense, and then you make a counterpoint and you're like, actually, here's a fact, and you just state a fact. Well, that's a huge narcissistic injury to them. So they're going to respond with narcissistic rage. And it's not attached to reality. It's not attached to what you said. Everything that they do and say is with the purpose of making them feel up here all the time. And so if they at any time feel like they're being brought down to a reasonable level, or if they perceive that because you are actually intelligent, because you do actually have a connection to reality, because you do actually have the wherewithal to ask questions, then they feel that that's a threat to their sense of superiority. And so they will attack it and do whatever it takes to put you back down here. So it's not this pre-planned, like, I imagine, like, I grew up on Animaniacs, and so it tells you kind of what my era was. But, like, Pinky and the Brain, and they're sitting there plotting every single night how to take over the world, right? And it's this super, like, intellectual cognitive thing where they're like, okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to take over the world. Like, it's not that calculated in the moment. In those moments where they respond with an attack, they're not that calculated. They're angry, and they're reacting out of rage. And of course, this has nothing to do with you. This has nothing to do with you. It is not a problem to ask a question. It is not a problem to make a point. It's not a problem to state a fact. A problem is if you're so out of touch with reality and you believe so many unrealistic things about yourself that the mere question makes you react in rage because how dare someone question something that you say? And so you have to, like, do whatever it takes to get the conversation off of that so that you feel up here and then they feel down here again. That's the problem. So the problem lies with them and their complete incapacity to process reality, not your ability to comment on reality. But we can't look at that and say, okay, what were they thinking? Well, they weren't thinking. They were emotionally reacting. And so whatever it is that they say, the motive behind what they say has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with rationality or logic. It has everything to do with how can I get them to feel less than so that I can feel up here? Or really, I guess more straightforwardly, how can I feel up here again because they said something and now I feel down here? So how do I get up here again? So most of the time, they have to make you feel bad in order to make them feel good. Maybe not all of the time, but their only goal is to emotionally reconnect with that superiority, right? So everything that they do and say is going to be towards that end, and it's not going to have anything to do with logic, reason, reality. It's an emotional reaction to what they perceived as a threat to their perfect image. Okay, so, and even that perceived threat is completely not based in reality. So that doesn't mean that you did anything wrong by commenting on reality or asking a question or making a point at all. You didn't do anything wrong. But they have to make you feel like you did. So whether they make things up and then, tell you how stupid you are for saying something that you never said, right? And then they're not going to listen to reason. If you continue trying to bring it back into a reasonable level, they're just going to perceive that as a constant attack on them, right? If you keep harping on and say, no, that's not what I said this, and you keep trying to get the conversation back to like logic and reason, it's why it's a trap, is because our goal is logic and reason. Our goal is connection. Our goal is understanding. That's not their goal. So you end up talking and communicating on literally two different planets, because you keep trying to bring the conversation back to Earth, and they need, their only purpose and motivation in life is to make sure that they stay on this made up planet. Okay? Planet, I am king or queen, or I am a god to be worshipped. So they're not ever going to get down here. That's not who they are. They don't want that. They want to feel up here, and they want you to agree that they are up here. And whether they do that by self-aggrandizing or by attacking you, either way, the goal is the same, for them to stay up here, you down here. So that kind of goes into your next comment. From what you have said, it sounds like they are aware, but it's hard to imagine how someone could be so calculative and go to such lengths to keep us confused. When it comes to just those conversational things, I do think that there are, because they are very calculative, as far as, especially when it comes to triangulating people, I do think, they do, I do believe, now someone totally can tell me otherwise, I don't, I don't know everything that goes on in the mind of a narcissist, but I do think that there are some instances where they are more like plotting and planning. But I think for the most part, especially when it comes to a conversation, it's more of an emotional reaction. It's not like they're sitting there using this part of their brain thinking steps ahead. What I think is more the case in those like anecdotal incidences of a conversation is that you said something that indicated to them that they are not, in your view, this grandiose God who is unquestionable. And so that what they do is emotionally driven response to get you back down here and then back up here, or at least them feeling that way. Okay, so whatever it is they do or say, that's their motivation, and it might not make any sense at all, and you're never going to make sense out of it because their goal isn't to make sense. So I'm trying to think another example of this, and it sort of goes into the concept of doublethink, where and this is sort of related to cognitive dissonance. So when we are holding two different opinions or beliefs, and they are conflicting, they are mutually exclusive, there is a feeling of discomfort where you're either having to rationalize away one or you're having to completely deny the other. And there's tension there. Well, there's tension there because on some level we know that they can't both be true, right? Like we're not psychologically built, I should say the normal person is not psychologically built to hold two completely conflicting pieces of information. And so there is tension there. And that's why if we are believing a lie, that means we have to be denying reality or denying the evidence that that lie is not true. Well, that creates tension. And so if someone comes up and like pokes a hole in the thing that we're trying to believe, so just as a basic example, if you're in a relationship with a really abusive person and you just want to believe that they love you, but every piece of evidence, they lie, they cheat, they get verbally abusive, they manipulate, they're threatening and intimidating if they don't get their way. All of this evidence in reality is saying that they don't really love you, but you're just determined to believe that they do, and so you're rationalizing away all of those bad behaviors, or you're justifying them in some way, or you're just denying some. That creates such a tension that if someone comes along and like, boop, pokes a little hole, and they're like, but wait a second, how can they love you if they completely ignore you, or how, like, that's not love, or they start like pointing out these inconsistencies, someone who is very committed to what they want to believe is true, they'll attack that person, right? How dare you? And that is something that codependents do if they're constantly committed to, if they're not yet open to reality. of maybe they don't really love me, or maybe they're incapable of love in general, which is the case with a narcissist. So everyone sort of has the capacity to have cognitive dissonance, and that can cause some serious problems. But what doublethink is when you actually believe both things at the same time. You don't actually have cognitive dissonance because somehow you've created a way in your mind to fully believe both things. So there is no discomfort. And I think that narcissists and psychopaths have that ability to believe anything that supports what they want in the moment. And it doesn't matter if it completely contradicts what they said 5 minutes ago. I know I shared the story a while ago about how I was in a waiting room with my mom one time, and she had hurt her finger. And we were waiting for the doctor to come in. She had a big cast on her hand, and she was holding her hand, and she winced. And so I was sitting on the side of her, and another patient was sitting on the other side of her. And kind of when she winced, we kind of both asked her at the same time if she was okay or if she was in pain. And totally without any kind of, she had no issues. There was nothing odd about in her behavior. It was just totally smooth. She turned to the stranger and she said, "No, it doesn't hurt." And then she turned around, she looked at me, and she said, "Yes, it hurts." Same movement. and no, nothing, it was as though it was the most natural thing in the world to do and say. She had no problems with that. That's not normal. And you could tell she fully believed both things. Fully believed both. Yes, it hurts. No, it doesn't. Why? It took me forever to figure this out. This is total doublethink. Because she was not processing the question based on reality. Because really, in reality, it's yes or no. It can't be both. Her hand either hurt or it did not. And given the fact that she winced, I'm going to assume that it did hurt her. Well, I know my mother. And my mother does not. My mother has an unbelievable amount of narcissism, as well as some borderline traits, as well as some pure demonic qualities at times. But the only thing she cared about is how other people perceived her. And I knew what her image was, and her image that she had to portray to the world at all costs was one of absolute strength, that she never needed anything. And she would rather die than ever admit that she needed something. She had a total savior complex, a total, she just had to be independently strong. And she had to be perceived as independently strong. So for a stranger to ask if she was in pain, the answer is always going to be no, whether she's in pain or not. So because it was a stranger and she needed to present her image to the stranger, she said no. Of course she did. But the problem is that I'm not a stranger, and her relationship with me behind closed doors, and because I'm her daughter, was totally different than that which, the mask that she had to wear with a stranger. And what she often did with me was she actually had to play the victim often with me because, well, that was just what she did. So she turned around. Well, her motive with me was very different, right? Because I had actually left, I was in college at the time, and I had actually left school when she hurt her hand. I dropped out of classes for 3 weeks to go take care of her because nobody else, she wouldn't admit to anyone that she was even hurt. I think people in town offered to take care of her. And I know that people would have, but she, again, like I just said, this is her narcissistic image. She does not need help. She does need help, but she won't ever admit it. and she would rather die than admit it. So what does she do? She calls me. And the expectation was, and this was before I had really truly woken up to narcissism, obviously, the expectation was that it was always my job to take care of everything. I was a scapegoat. I was the reason for everything, and it was my job to fix everything, and I had apologized for everything, whether I had anything to do with it or not. That was my role. So it was expected that I take care of all the problems. So, but she lacked any kind of attachment to reality to have any problem with going from, no, I'm not hurt, to yes, I am hurt. Because we were two different people. So the answer is different, because the goal of the answer is not to be honest, it's to tell people what they need to hear in order for them to have the image of you that you want them to have. So I spent like months really just mind blown. Like, I'm trying to figure out how, in that one scenario, what in the world happened, how in the world, trying to make sense out of that. It finally made sense when I understood the rules by which they play have nothing to do with truth. None. It has everything to do with their image. And that's when it made sense. It's like, oh, it didn't even process through her mind the actual question, which was, are you hurting? Or does it hurt? She didn't process that. They don't process real information. All they do is, what is going to get me what I need from this person? And that determines what they say. And they don't think about whether it's different from what they say from person to person, even if both people are in the same room. And so, total doublethink. She believed both because she didn't process whether it was true or not. She processed what she needed from each person. And that's how they're wired. So it's useless to drive ourselves crazy trying to make sense of that on a logical level. It is logical when you understand what their motive is. It's just not logical based on what they're actually saying and trying to make sense out of it that way. But everything starts to make sense once you realize their pure goal has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with telling the truth. It has everything to do with presenting the image of what they need this person to believe, which could be totally different from what they need this person to believe. And they're not going to process that those are different things. They're going to believe both, right? So it's doublethink. Okay. I think the reason I got off into that, because that seems a little rabbit trailish, is that they're not necessarily sitting down every night trying to plot out ways to keep everyone confused. It's not that cognitive of a thing. It's really very, very much an emotional reaction. They're not cognitively processing information. I think even I watched a video this was in regards to psychopaths and the way that their brains work. So I don't know if just pure narcissism is different, but it was talking about how they process everything in such a shallow way. And so they have no emotional connections to anything, and they process emotional concepts the same way they process... Honey, come here. I know, there's people. I know. They process everything the same way, and it's very shallow. It's extremely shallow. So they don't really... I don't think that they really plot things out in the sense that you and I would imagine plotting, because we use this part of our brain, we use the prefrontal cortex to plan, to discern, to parcel things out, to try to make sense of things. They don't really do that. They're more reactionary, and it's based on emotion, and it's based on what's going to get them what they want, and it is very manipulative, but it's just not that cognitive planning that you and I might assume has to go into it. And it's very hard for us to imagine someone who just doesn't even process reality at all. And it does seem, I think this goes into the last question, about they seem to sit on both sides of the intelligence spectrum. They're so dumb in how they manage their lives, yet very clever when it comes to psychological manipulations. So they don't, yeah, like I said in the beginning, there's the sum total of their value in life is their image. Whatever image they're trying to portray. And that's going to change based on what they want out of different people. So, you know, sometimes they're going to present the victim image. Sometimes they're going to present the superior, all-intelligent image. But it's all an image. It's all a mask. And it's all based on getting them what they want. So because that's the singular thing that matters to them and nothing else matters, they've spent their entire lives doing this. So you know, normal people spend what, 0% of their lives doing that? I don't know. That's not what we care about. It's not our value. Maybe a very small percentage of our lives. It's essentially like if you're going on a job interview, you're thinking forward in this, or maybe like a date or something. You're specifically thinking about, well, how is this person going to perceive me? What do they like? I should probably look this way or that way, or make sure and you're censoring yourself in a certain way. But only, you know, normal people only do that in like limited circumstances of like a job interview or, you know, a first date where you're thinking about your first impression. But then, because you have a real personality, we have real personalities, we develop relationships where we get to know people, that, you know, that's why we gravitate to some people and not other people. We're going to gravitate to the people who are like us, who understand us, where we feel comfortable being ourselves, where we don't have to constantly be self-censoring, because that's not comfortable. That's not, we want to be free to be who we really are because we have a real self. Well, they don't have a real self. So take your mindset during a job interview or preparing for a job interview where you're, okay, who's the boss? What's the environment? Say you're going to like a company, a new company, and you're like, what's the environment there? What are they looking for? What do they want to see? And you're going to try to present that image, right? Even if it's not totally who you are. If you're trying to get a job, that's a goal. So you're going to like modify yourself to give yourself the best chance of getting that goal. Well, they do that 100% of the time. So, you know, our goal is to get a job. So we, for an interview, will mold ourselves to try to get a job. Well, when they meet people, their goal is, maybe it's money, maybe it's pity, maybe it's a roof over their head. They always have a goal with whoever they interact with. If they don't have a goal, they don't interact. They don't waste their energy on silly little things like emotional connection and relationships. They get nothing out of that. They get supply. So whatever supply they're trying to get out of whoever, they're going to mold themselves. And so they're always thinking that way. Imagine thinking that every moment of your life is a job interview and that every single person, there is a different goal that you're trying to get out of them. Like, if that's all you ever do and all you ever think about, then you're going to get very good at that image game of presenting yourself in a certain way to the point where you don't really have to think about it. Right? So we have to understand that they're not necessarily intelligent. They just have a ton of practice manipulating because that's all they do. They don't have a real self that they finally relax and they're like, oh, I can be me. Hey, no. You so scare me every time you bark like that. It just scares me. I know you hear stuff I can't hear. They're like that all the time. So they get good at the manipulation game, but I don't know that it's necessarily intelligence. Not in any way that I would value intelligence. I know that you can be a psychopath and have a very high IQ. So because IQ is not really a personal value of mine, I don't really see that matters. I'm not impressed by IQs. in any stretch. I don't think it's of any value to this world at all. I think emotional IQ is of value to this world, but that reflects my values. Obviously, those are very different values than other people have. So, you know, you can have a genuinely mentally retarded person with an incredibly low IQ, and they have the biggest hearts and most open souls and the light in their eyes that you will never see in a psychopath or a narcissist, with a 165 IQ. Who cares? If you don't have love, in my book, I don't care how smart you are. So I don't know. I mean, they can have that form of intelligence and be a narcissist and a psychopath, because it's not about that kind of intelligence. It's truly an emotional disability and a spiritual, I would say, disability. I would say primarily spiritual, that then affects the emotions and then affects the way that they think. But that's my personal view. That's not a professional view. That's just how I see it. So they are very dumb in anything that involves emotions, anything that would depend upon emotions, like relationships. They all tend to have, this is my experience. I would be curious to hear other people's experiences with this, but with the narcissists in my life, because they're just so irresponsible that they all seemed to have money problems. And I don't know if that was a lie that they would tell to try to get people to give them money, so maybe they didn't really have money problems, they just said that they did, and that was one of their, you know, manipulative things. But it seemed as though the ones in my life always were just so irresponsible. And that would make sense, right? Because if your only value is you, then you're going to spend money on you, and not really think about whether you have that money or not. So it would make perfect sense if they tend to have severe money issues. And in that regard, be very irresponsible with their own lives, and because that's going to cause all kind of other problems, if you're an irresponsible spender, you have terrible credit, then you're going from one thing to the other. You can't be stable. They have no stability in their own personal lives. Why? Because all of their attention is focused on manipulating. So yeah, I guess, I don't know. I don't really consider that intelligence. I think on a big view, in a very wide view, they're about as dumb as they can get. Because I think whether you believe in karma or whether you believe in Judgment Day in a more Christian sense, if you believe in the concept of reaping what you sow, that there is larger consequences to our attitudes and behaviors than just what happens in the very moment, then they would be considered the dumbest people in the world, because they're just reaping, or they're sowing a whole lot of bad, and they will one day reap a whole lot of bad. But they don't live their lives based on any kind of concept like that. They're very much in the moment. What gets me to be top now? And they don't have any boundaries on what they're willing to do to get there. So they're very in the moment. They're very reactionary. And because they're so good, and all they really have is that image that they're constantly trying to portray to get what they want out of different people, and that's just how they operate in life, they are very good at it. And maybe that seems like intelligence to us, because we're just like, how can anyone be that calculated and prepared to have all of these different people, like a chess game, to know different things and then pit these people against each other? And we're thinking of it on a cognitive level as though they're actually that good cognitively, and I think that that's not. They're very emotionally driven. So they have learned over time emotionally how to emotionally manipulate things. They're not necessarily, I don't think, thinking of it on a cognitive level. So I think once we grasp their condition in that way and what their values are in every given moment, that's when these little things like confusing conversations actually start to make sense. That confusing interaction with my mom finally made sense when I understood the concept of doublethink, and that she's not attached to reality at all. She's only attached to what people are going to think of me and what I need from them. So it made perfect sense that she would say no to this person and yes to me in the same move and have no problem, like no cognitive dissonance there, because she's not attached to reality, and her only goal is to get certain people to think certain things. So that's not terribly intelligent, considering the fact that I was sitting right there and could see her different answers. She didn't think that through, but she wasn't thinking through. It was emotional. It's all emotional. So they're definitely different creatures on pretty fundamental levels. So anyways, I just thought that was such a great question, and I went kind of long giving all kinds of thoughts on that, but those are just my personal thoughts. Feel free to write in the comment section below. I would love to hear feedback from other people, and like, what are some of you guys' experience with these kinds of crazy making conversations, and you know, did they seem intelligent in some ways and stupid in other ways? I tend to see patterns when people start sharing their experiences, so I think a lot of us have very similar experiences. So feel free to write in the comments below. Honey and I are gonna go now because she's, I guess, ready for a walk, and I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you later.